A certain fundamental attitude of the soul must be the starting point. The spiritual investigator calls this fundamental attitude the path of veneration, of devotion to truth and knowledge. Without this fundamental attitude, no one can become an occult pupil. What was once childlike veneration for persons becomes later on a veneration for truth and knowledge. The heights of the spirit can be scaled only by passing through the gateway of humility. But every criticism, every adverse judgment passed, dispels the powers of the soul for the attainment of higher knowledge, just as reverent veneration develops these powers. It must be emphasized that in the domain of higher knowledge it is not a matter of venerating persons, but of venerating knowledge and truth. It is the soul which exercises the faculty of cognition, and feelings are for the soul what foodstuffs are for the body. If the body is given stones instead of bread, its activity will die away. So too with the soul. Veneration, respect, devotion are nourishing foodstuffs, which make the soul healthy and vigorous, especially in the activity of cognition. Disrespect, antipathy, underestimation of what deserves recognition exert a paralyzing, withering effect on the faculty of cognition. Reverence awakens a power of sympathy in the soul, through which we draw towards us qualities in the beings around us, qualities which would otherwise remain concealed. The individual learns to give herself up less and less to impressions of the outer world and to develop instead an active inner life. All the knowledge you pursue merely for the enrichment of your own learning and to accumulate treasure of your own leads you away from the path, but all knowledge you pursue in order to grow more mature on the path of human ennoblement and world progress brings you a step forward. Every idea that does not become your ideal kills a power in your soul. Every idea that becomes an ideal engenders life forces within you. Provide for yourself moments of inner tranquility and learn in these moments to distinguish the essential from the non-essential. All rules and teaching of spiritual science were originally given in a language of symbolic signs. And those who wish to know the full significance and extent of these teachings must first learn to understand this symbolic language. The people must set aside a short period of her daily life during which to concern herself with something altogether different from the objects of her daily occupation. During this time, her thoughts and life of feeling should assume a different coloring. She should let her joys, her sorrows, her cares, her experiences, her deeds pass in review before her soul, and her attitude should be such that she looks at everything else in this experience from a higher standpoint. Our aim in these moments of seclusion must be to contemplate and judge our experiences and actions as though they were those of another, not our own. The pupil must at certain times look for the strength to stand towards herself as a stranger. She must confront her own self with the inner calmness of a judge. During a calm inner survey, the essential separates from the non-essential. Sorrow and joy, every thought, every resolve, wears a different guise when we confront ourselves in this way. For every human being bears within herself a higher human, besides the everyday human. This higher one remains hidden until she is awakened, and can only be awakened by the individual herself. But as long as this higher being is not awakened, the higher faculties which slumber in everyone and lead to supersensible knowledge remain concealed. Gradually, she will become more and more her own guide and will allow herself to be less and less led by circumstances and external influences. She will soon discover what a source of strength these periods of seclusion are for her. She will gradually cease to be angered by things that formerly angered her. Countless things which formerly alarmed her will no longer do so. Now this thought no longer comes to her of, I lack the power to do this. But a quite different one arises. Henceforth, she says to herself, I will muster all my strength to do my work as well as I possibly can. And she suppresses the thought that might make her anxious, for she knows that anxiety might well impair her performance, and that in any case it cannot help her to do better. For it is by her progress in this direction that the pupil gradually reaches the point where she herself determines how the impressions of the outer world shall affect her. The higher self then becomes the inner ruler who directs the circumstances of the outer human with a sure hand. As long as the outer human is in control, the inner self is her slave and so cannot unfold her powers. If the fact of my getting angry or not depends upon something extraneous to myself, I am not master of myself, or better said, I have not yet found the ruler within me. I must develop the faculty of allowing the impressions of the outer world to approach me only in a way I myself determine. Then only can I become a pupil in the real sense. Many have striven for years without noticing any appreciable progress, but many of those who did not despair but remained unshaken have then quite suddenly achieved the inner victory. She listens to the voices which speak to her in the moments of inner tranquility. In her inner life, she cultivates intercourse with the spiritual world. She soon ceases to feel that this thought world is less real than the everyday things around her. She begins to treat her thoughts as though she were dealing with external things, and then the moment approaches when she begins to feel that what reveals itself to her in the silence of inner thought activity is much higher, much more real than the things in space. She discovers that life expresses itself in this thought world. She realizes that thoughts are not mere shadow pictures, but that hidden beings speak to her through them. Only of the silence something begins to speak to her. Formerly she heard it through her ear only, now it resounds through her soul. An inner speech, an inner word has revealed itself to her. When experienced for the first time, this moment is most blessed for the pupil. An inner light spreads over her whole external world. A second life begins for her. The stream of a divine, bliss-bestowing world pours through her. This life of the soul in thought, which widens more and more into a life in the spiritual reality of being, is called by the gnosis and by spiritual science meditation. Meditation of this order is the means by which supersensible knowledge is attained. But in such moments, the pupil must not revel in feelings. She must not have vague, undefined sensations in her soul. Her thoughts must be clear and sharply defined. Through such meditation, a complete transformation takes place in the pupil. She begins to form entirely new conceptions of reality. All things acquire different values for her. In the past, she did not know why she should work, why she should suffer, but now she knows. Whoever rises through meditation to the point where human nature is united with the spirit begins to kindle to life that which is eternal in her, that which is not confined within the boundaries of birth and death. The existence of this eternal reality can be doubted only by those who have not themselves experienced it. Thus, meditation is the way which also leads the human to knowledge and vision of the eternal, indestructible core of her being, and only through meditation can this vision spring to her. Through meditation, the remembrance of experiences beyond birth and death is revived. Whenever she observes a quite definite blossoming and thriving, she should banish everything else from her soul and for a short time give herself entirely to this one impression. She will soon convince herself that a feeling which would previously have merely flitted through her soul now acquires a strong and energetic form. Anyone who has often turned her attention to the process of growing, blossoming, and thriving will feel something remotely similar to the experience of a sunrise, and the process of fading and dying will evoke an experience comparable in the same way to the slow rising of the moon over the horizon. These feelings are two forces which, when properly nurtured and developed to an ever-increasing pitch, lead to the most significant result. If the pupil has progressed so far that she can perceive the spiritual forms of phenomena which are also physically visible to her outer sight, she will then not be far from the stage of seeing things which have no physical existence, and must therefore remain entirely hidden, occult, for anyone who has not received instruction in spiritual science. In the soul world and in the world of thoughts, feelings and thoughts work upon each other just as physical objects do in the physical world. As long as anyone is not vividly imbued with this awareness, she will not believe that a wrong thought she harbors may have as devastating an effect upon other thoughts in the realm of thoughts as the effect of a random bullet on physical objects it hits. Like laws of the physical world, there are laws too for the world of feeling and thought, only they cannot impose themselves on the human from without. They must flow out of the life of her own soul. This is achieved if she forbids herself at all times to harbor wrong thoughts and feelings. All arbitrary flitting hither and thither in thought, all capricious plays of fancy, all fortuitous ebb and flow of emotion must be forbidden. By observing this rule, nobody becomes poverty-stricken in feeling. On the contrary, if the inner life is regulated in this way, the person will soon find herself becoming rich in feeling and in genuine imagination. Petty emotionalism and frivolous flights of thought are replaced by significant emotions and fruitful thoughts. Such feelings and thoughts lead the human to orient herself in the spiritual world. She establishes the right relationships to the things of that world, and this has a definite effect. The people must also further give care to cultivating the world of sound. She must discriminate between the sounds produced by anything called lifeless. For example, a falling mass, a bell, or a musical instrument, and sounds that come from a living creature, an animal, or a human being. Someone who hears the sound of a bell may associate a feeling of pleasure with it. Someone who hears the cry of an animal will discern in the sound, besides her own feeling, the expression of an inner experience of the animal, whether of pleasure or of pain. It is with this latter category of sounds the pupil must set to work. She must concentrate her whole attention on the fact that the sound tells her of something that is foreign to her own soul, and she must sink herself into this foreign element. She must unite her own feeling inwardly with the pain or pleasure of which the sound tells her. She must be beyond caring whether for her the sound is pleasant or unpleasant, agreeable or disagreeable. Her soul must be imbued only with what is going on in the being from whom the sound proceeds. Anyone who carries out such exercises with method and deliberation will acquire the faculty of mingling, as it were, with the being from whom the sound proceeds. To cultivate her life feeling in this way will be easier for a person sensitive to music than one who is unmusical. But let no one believe that a sense for music can be a substitute for this cultivation. The people of occult science must learn to respond in this way to the whole of nature, and by this means a new faculty will take root in the world of feeling and thought. Through her resounding tones, the whole of nature begins to whisper her secrets to the pupil. What she previously experienced as incomprehensible noise will become an expressive language of nature herself. And whereas she had previously heard only sounds from the so-called lifeless world, she is now aware of a new language of the soul. If she makes further progress in this cultivation of her feelings, she will realize that she can hear things of which she previously knew nothing. She begins to hear with the soul. Of very special importance for the pupil's development is the way in which she listens to others when they are speaking. She must accustom herself to do this in such a way that while listening, her own inner self is absolutely silent. The pupil must silence all inner agreement or disagreement. When she has trained herself to listen without criticism, even when the most preposterous statement is made in her presence, she learns gradually to merge herself into the being of another. Then she hears through the words into the very soul of the other. It is through assiduous practice of this kind that sound becomes for the first time the right means for perceiving the soul and the spirit. When these exercises are practiced in connection with the others, a new sense of hearing develops in the soul. The soul is now able to become aware of communications from the spiritual world which are not expressed in sounds perceptible to the physical ear. Perception of the inner word awakens. Truth from the spiritual world gradually reveal themselves to the pupil. She hears herself addressed in a spiritual way. All higher truths are attained through such perception of the inner word. Enlightenment is the result of very simple processes. Here, too, it is a matter of developing certain feelings and thoughts which slumber in every human and must be wakened. The beginning is made by studying different beings of nature in a particular way. For example, a transparent, beautifully formed stone, a crystal, a plant, and an animal. One should endeavor at first to direct one's whole attention to a comparison of the stone with the animal. The thoughts here indicated as examples must pass through the soul accompanied by alert feelings, and no other thought, no other feeling must intrude and disturb the intensely attentive contemplation. The pupil says to herself, "The stone has a form, the animal too has a form. The stone remains motionless in its place, the animal changes its place. It is natural impulse, desire, which causes the animal to change its place. Natural impulses are moreover served by the animal's form. Its organs and limbs are in keeping with these impulses. This structure of the stone is not fashioned according to desires, but by power that is void of desire." If one thinks deeply into such thoughts, while contemplating the stone and the animal with fixed attention, two quite different kinds of feelings will arise in the soul, one kind from the stone and the other from the animal. At first, the feelings are present only as long as the contemplation lasts. Later on, their after effects continue, and then they become something that remains alive in the soul. The student has then only to reflect, and both feelings will always arise, even without contemplation of an external object. Out of these feelings and the thoughts connected with them, organs of clairvoyance are formed. If the plant is then included in the contemplation, it will be observed that the feeling emanating from it lies midway, both in character and degree, between the feeling that streams from the stone and the feeling that streams from the animal. The organs thus formed are eyes of the spirit. With them, the pupil gradually learns to see something like psychic and spiritual colors. The spiritual world, with its lines and figures, remains dark as long as she has achieved only what has been described in preparation. Through enlightenment, it becomes light. Once a person has acquired the faculty of seeing with spiritual eyes, she encounters sooner or later the spiritual beings, some of them higher than the human in rank and some lower. They are beings who never enter physical existence.